Hello and welcome back to Learn English Easy. I'm your host, here to take you through another deep dive into, well, the fascinating mechanisms of how we think, how we work, and how we live. You know, it's funny, we're talking about the architecture of success and this word grit today because I honestly nearly called in sick. I spent, and I'm not exaggerating, 6 hours yesterday trying to assemble a bookshelf.
Oh, no. How did it go? I mean, did the bookshelf
The
survive?
bookshelf survived, yes, but my ego it's barely hanging on. Technically, I had the grit. I had the perseverance. I kept turning the screwdriver, you know? I
Yeah.
refused to let this inanimate object win. But about 3 hours in, when I realized I put the back panel on upside down and had to undo 20 screws, the passion was definitely gone.
Oh, I can imagine.
In fact, the only passion I had was a passionate desire to throw the Allen wrench through the window and, I don't know, move into a cave.
You know, that actually sets us up perfectly for what we're talking about today.
Right.
Because what you experience, that feeling, that urge to quit, that feeling that the task is just miserable even though you're still doing it, that might not mean you lack grit.
Oh.
It might just mean the definition of grit we've all been sold is a little, well, incomplete.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Maybe
Uh,
I'm not a quitter. I'm just linguistically misunderstood.
We'll see about that. But we're exploring the concept of failing forward.
And we can't talk about success without talking about other people.
Right.
We don't live in a vacuum. So we're going to get into the social dynamics of gossip, which it turns out is way more complex than I ever thought, and how leaders manage what are called difficult systems.
And finally, we'll bring it right up to the present day, how artificial intelligence is stepping in to try and coach us through our own habits.
From popcorn tycoons to AI chatbots. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the buzzword of the decade, grit. We all kind of know Angela Duckworth's definition, don't we? It's been the secret sauce of success in every business book for like the last 10 years.
It has. And to really understand the critique we're looking at today, we have to start with that baseline definition. So Duckworth defines grit as a combination of two very specific things. Perseverance of effort, we could just call that PE,
PE. Got it.
and consistency of interest, or CI.
PE and CI. It sounds like a chemical formula for a cleaning product or something.
It essentially is a formula for achievement, yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is that talent isn't enough. You can be a genius, but if you quit, you lose. You need the PE, the hard work, the drive, the grind, and you need to combine it with CI, this unwavering long-term passion for a single goal.
But we've got some research here that pokes some holes in that.
We do. From Oxford and Kajabi, it's called Exploring Grit. And they basically took a linguistic magnifying glass to these terms, and what they found were some real cracks in the foundation.
I loved this part of the research because they actually break down the etymology. They point out that perseverance of effort is. It's actually a bit redundant.
It is, isn't it?
Because if you look up perseverance in the dictionary, it literally includes the idea of effort or maintaining a course of action despite difficulty. So when you say perseverance of effort, you're really saying continued effort of effort.
It does sound a bit repetitive, like saying wet water. But the real controversy, the real debate, isn't with the effort part. I think everyone agrees hard work is necessary. If you want to learn a language or build a business, you have to do the work. The controversy is in that second part.
Consistency of interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the language gets so tricky. Duckworth often uses the word passion interchangeably with consistency of interest. And this source argues that's a pretty big linguistic and psychological mistake.
Why a mistake?
Well, let's look at the nuance. Passion implies something really intense. You know, zeal, fervor, a strong emotion. It's fiery. It's what you see in the movies where the protagonist is burning the midnight oil with this wild look in their eyes.
Right.
But interest is usually much milder. It's cognitive. It's intellectual curiosity.
Okay, that is a huge distinction. I can be interested in history, I can read about it, I can enjoy a documentary, but that doesn't mean I have a burning, fiery passion for the War of 1812 every single morning when I wake up.
Precisely. And this really matters because if you equate the two, you set an impossibly high bar for yourself. The source points out that interest can be long-term, but it doesn't necessarily have those emotional highs of passion. If you expect to feel zeal every day you go to work or every single day you sit down to study a language, well, you're going to think you're failing when you're actually just being normal.
So we're kind of gaslighting ourselves into thinking we lack grit just because we aren't hyper-emotional about our work every day.
In a way, yes. But here's where it gets really, really interesting for me. The measurement flaws. The researchers looked at the grit scale. the actual psychometric survey they use to measure how gritty someone is.
The test itself.
The test itself. And they found something kind of hilarious and honestly a bit concerning about how they score consistency of interest.
This part blew my mind. The questions are basically rigged.
Rigged might be a strong word, but they're certainly biased. They noticed that the items measuring consistency of interest are almost all negatively worded.
Okay, so give us an example. What does that look like on the test? How would they ask the question?
So on the test, you'd see a statement like, I often set a goal, but later choose to pursue a different one. Or another one is, new ideas and projects sometimes distract me from previous ones. And just listen to how those are framed. If you agree with those statements, if you say, yes, I sometimes change my mind, your grit score goes down. You are considered lesser.
So if I change my mind, I'm defective.
That is the clear implication of the scale.
Yeah.
But just think about human development for a second. Think about university students. Is it ungritty for a 20-year-old to take a biology class, realize they absolutely hate it, and switch to literature?
No, of course not. That's called learning. That's called growing up. That's just figuring out who you are. If you stick with the biology class, even though you hate it, just to get a high grit score, that's not grit. That's just being stubborn.
Exactly. Or maybe it's just fear of sunk costs. The source argues that framing changing interests as a negative trait completely ignores the reality of how we discover our paths in life. It pathologizes curiosity.
Right.
It frames the natural evolution of human interest as a lack of character. If you stick to a goal you hate just to prove you have consistency of interest, that isn't a virtue. It's actually a trap.
Now, since our podcast is called Learn English Easy, we have to touch on this L2 grit aspect. This is grit applied specifically to learning a second language. So what did the data show there? Does passion matter more for language learners?
And this is where the rubber really meets the road. The studies found that perseverance of effort, so the hard work, the showing up, the doing the homework, that is a very strong predictor of language proficiency. If you do the work, you get the results. That correlation is solid.
But the consistency of interest part?
Much less reliable. In some studies, it has very low reliability. The correlation between having a so-called consistent interest and actually getting good at the language is pretty weak.
So, practically speaking, what does this mean for you, for the listener who might be struggling with your English studies right now?
It means you don't need to worry if your passion for English, or any skill, really, if it fluctuates, you don't need to feel a burning desire every time you open the textbook. You can feel bored. You can feel tired. You can even feel like looking at a French textbook instead. What matters is the behavior, the perseverance of effort. You can be bored and still be gritty as long as you keep doing the work.
That is incredibly liberating. It separates the feeling from the action. You don't have to feel gritty to be gritty.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're putting in the effort, we're persevering, we're ignoring the fact that our passion has dipped, but eventually, inevitably, we're going to hit a wall. We're going to fail. And that brings us to the next layer of our deep dive, the failure freeway.
This concept comes from John C. Maxwell's work, Failing Forward. And honestly, it's one of the best visualizations of failure I've ever come across.
I love this metaphor. He says most people treat failure like a traffic jam. You know, they get stuck, they get frustrated, they just sit there fuming, waiting for things to clear up. They see it as this external thing that has trapped them.
Right. And his argument is that you need to find an exit. You cannot just sit on the failure freeway. But to do that, to actually turn the wheel and get off that highway, you have to make a really critical distinction.
What's that?
Between an event and an identity.
Okay, so the difference between saying, I failed at doing something, versus saying, I am a failure.
It sounds like such a subtle semantic shift, but it changes your entire physiology.
It does. If failure is an event, it's external, it's a flat tire, you can fix it, you can learn from it, you replace the tire and you move on. But if failure is your identity, it's internal, it's who you are. And you can't fix who you are, so you give up. You sit in the car on the freeway and accept your fate. Maxwell brings up the rules for being human, and rule number 1 is just, you will make mistakes. It's factory-installed software. We aren't bug-free, but he uses some incredible case studies of people who didn't just fail, but were humiliated or physically broken, and they just kept going.
The story of Orville Redenbacher really stood out to me.
The popcorn guy. I think most of us just know the face on the jar, right?
Right.
The bow tie, the thick glasses, the funny hair. You assume he was a mascot or maybe an actor hired by a corporation.
Far from it. Orville Redenbacher was a legitimate agricultural scientist. He went to Purdue University. He spent decades crossbreeding thousands of popcorn hybrids.
Wow.
He was looking for a specific genetic trait, a kernel that would expand to 40 times its original size, making it lighter and fluffier. He was absolutely obsessed with the product itself.
And the source points out that people made fun of him. They called him a wry caricature. He looked funny, he talked funny, he had a funny name. A marketing agency today would probably tell him to hire some handsome actor to sell the corn.
Of course they would.
Yeah.
But he didn't care. He wasn't playing a character. He was just being himself, obsessing over popcorn. And because he separated that public perception from his internal drive, he built an empire. He didn't let the laughter stop the science. He knew that the failure of people to understand him wasn't a failure of his product.
But then you have a story in the source material that is so much more visceral. Beck-Weathers.
Yeah, this one is heavy. This isn't about popcorn. Beck-Weathers was one of the survivors of that 1996 Mount Everest disaster, the one they made movies about. He was literally left for dead in the snow.
It's a harrowing story. He was in a hypothermic coma, and when he miraculously woke up and stumbled back into camp, he was black with frostbite. He eventually lost his nose, his right arm below the elbow, and all the fingers on his left hand.
I mean, it's a level of physical loss that most of us we cannot comprehend. And yet, his perspective is baffling to the average person. He said he wouldn't trade his hands back if it meant going back to who he was before the accident.
That just stops you in your tracks. How can someone say that? How can you possibly say, I'm glad I lost my hands?
Because he viewed the tragedy not as a failure of survival, but as a correction of his character. He admitted that before the climb, his life was hollow. He was driven by ego, by conquering mountains, by proving himself. He was disconnected from his family.
So the tragedy forced him to.
It forced him to rebuild his identity from the ground up. He failed to climb the mountain. He never even made the summit, but he succeeded in becoming a human being he actually liked.
That connects to another concept Maxwell talks about, and this seems so crucial for mental health, especially when you're dealing with something like what happened to Beck-Weathers. It's the difference between a problem and a fact of life.
This is a vital mental model for resilience. A problem is something you can solve. If your car breaks down, that's a problem. You fix it. If your business is losing money, that's a problem. You change your strategy.
Right.
A fact of life is something that has happened, cannot be changed, and must be accepted.
Like the flood that destroyed Greg Horn's store in the source material. The water is there. The store is gone. You can't unflood the store.
Exactly. Or Roger Crawford, the tennis player they mentioned who has no hands and one foot because of a birth defect. That is a fact of life. If he treated that as a problem to be solved, meaning if he waited until he had hands to play, he would spend his entire life frustrated.
He'd never play.
Never. By accepting it as a fact of life, he could ask a different question. Okay, given this fact, how do I play tennis? And he became a certified professional.
So success really seems to come from knowing which bucket to put your struggles in. If you try to solve a fact of life, you go crazy. You're just fighting reality. But if you just accept a problem that you could actually fix, then you just stay stuck.
And sometimes the only way to tell the difference, or maybe just to survive the transition between the two, is a sense of humor.
Yes. The source talks about President Calvin Coolidge. Now, Coolidge was known for being very quiet, silent Cal. But he had this incredibly dry wit. Apparently, he was asked if he was going to the exposition in Philadelphia. He said yes. And the reporter asked, why?
What did he say?
Coolidge, the president of the United States, just said, as an exhibit.
That's great. It's a dry wit, but it serves a function.
Laughter, as Victor Borge said, is the shortest distance between two people. But it's also the shortest distance between a disaster and a new perspective.
How so?
If you can laugh at your failure, if you can see yourself as an exhibit, you have detached your identity from the situation. You're looking at it from the outside. You are no longer the victim, you become the observer.
So we've got grit to get us going even when that passion fades. We've got a failing forward mindset to handle the crashes.
Right.
But now we have to deal with the traffic, the other cars on the road. We have to talk about people, and specifically gossip.
Ah, gossip. This social glue that can also be a solvent. It binds us together, but it can also dissolve trust in a matter of seconds. We have this Reddit thread in our sources that I think captures the modern nuance perfectly. A user wrote something like, not all gossip is mean girls. Sometimes it's just information sharing, it's venting, it's figuring out who to avoid.
And that's true.
Yep.
Anthropologically, gossip is how we monitor social norms. It's how we figure out who is safe and who isn't without having to, experience everyone directly. But there was a fascinating experiment discussed about Alex, a hypothetical colleague.
Poor Alex. This guy just can't seem to catch a break in these studies.
Poor Alex, indeed. So in the study, Alex is described as a gossiper. He talks about everyone, good things, bad things. He just shares information freely. And the study asked participants, would you trust Alex? Would you ask Alex for advice?
And the answer was a resounding no, right? I mean, people generally don't want to seek advice from someone who just leaks information.
That's right. It signals a lack of integrity. The logic is simple. If he talks about them to me, he's definitely talking about me to them.
But there was a twist.
There was a twist. And here is where it gets really interesting about human psychology. They introduced something called a competence cue.
A competence cue? What is that?
They told a second group of participants that Alex, yes, he's a notorious gossiper, but he was also highly competent. He was active in professional development. He was always up to date on industry trends. He delivered amazing results.
Did they still distrust him?
The social penalty for gossiping almost vanished. If Alex was seen as highly competent, people were willing to seek his advice,
Ooh.
even though they knew he was a gossiper.
Wow. So competence creates a buffer, a shield.
It seems so. We tolerate difficult behavior if the person delivers results. This explains a lot about toxic workplace cultures, doesn't it? We keep the genius jerk because their competence outweighs the social cost, at least in the short term. We trade our comfort for their output.
But there is a darker side to this, too. We have a source here on evil speaking and slander that tells a pretty harrowing story about how gossip spirals when competence isn't the issue, but interpretation is.
This was the story of person A and person B. And it's a classic game of telephone gone horribly wrong. Person A told a couple that the wife was too negative.
Which is already a tough conversation to have. I mean, nobody wants to be told they're negative.
It is. But the wife, let's call her the listener, she didn't just hear you're negative. She interpreted negative to mean something entirely different. She thought it meant, I am blowing up the church. She thought she was being accused of destruction. She then calls person B to ask for advice. Person B hears this distorted version and surmises, and that is the key word from the text, surmises, that person A is trying to control the church and run people out.
So in a few steps, we went from you're a bit negative to there is a massive conspiracy to purge the entire congregation.
In a matter of hours. And it led to paranoia, exclusion, a massive conflict. The lesson from the source is all about the danger of surmising. We fill in the gaps of what we don't know with our own fears. We assume motives.
So what happened?
The listener eventually had to write an apology letter, not for being negative, but for participating in that whole spiral of speculation.
Okay, so how do you stop it? If you're the one listening to the gossip, or if someone comes to you venting like that, how do you put the brakes on without being rude?
The source suggests a tactic called the blank stare.
The blank stare. I love this. It sounds so aggressive, but tell us how it works.
It's actually completely passive. It's very simple. When someone starts gossiping or venting maliciously, you just give them zero emotional feedback. No nodding, no, oh, really?
Yeah.
No shocked face, just a blank stare, maybe a blink.
It's like cutting the oxygen supply to a fire.
That's exactly it. Gossip requires a co-conspirator. It requires validation. It needs energy to survive. If you refuse to validate it, if you just stand there neutrally, the speaker usually feels awkward and just stops.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful nonverbal boundary. You aren't arguing with them. You're just not feeding the beast.
That leads us perfectly into the broader topic of leadership and systems. Because dealing with gossip isn't just about one-on-one interactions. It's about managing the whole group dynamic, whether it's a family, a church, or a business.
Right, and we're looking at this through the lens of family systems theory, particularly from the works of Friedman and Boers. And they use a metaphor that I think anyone who has ever lived in an old house with bad plumbing will understand immediately. The hot shower.
Oh, I know this struggle.
Yeah.
You step in, it's freezing cold, you turn the knob up, nothing happens. You turn it up a little more, still nothing. You crank it all the way up and suddenly it's lava.
And what's your reaction? You scream and you crank it all the way back to cold. And the cycle just repeats. You are constantly reacting, and the system, the water temperature, it never stabilizes. You're just swinging from one extreme to the other.
And this is how leaders often manage conflict, by just jerking the knob back and forth.
It is. A leader tries to fix a complaint. That's the cold water. Someone complains, we need more structure. The leader overfunctions. They create 10 new rules. Now the system is unbalanced. It's too hot. Then someone else complains, this is too rigid. And the leader jerks the wheel the other way and abolishes the rules. They are in a state of constant disequilibrium. They're being controlled by the feedback.
So the goal is, what? Homeostasis, to keep things the same.
Well, homeostasis is what the system wants. Groups of people naturally resist change. When a leader tries to move forward, the system will unconsciously try to pull them back. This is called the change back reaction.
Change back. It's like when you start a diet and your friends suddenly start offering you pizza every day. Come back to us, be the old you.
Precisely. The system prefers the devil it knows. In the source material, they talk about henpecking comments. A leader prepares a great sermon, or a CEO gives a great vision speech, and the feedback they get is, "You didn't visit so-and-so at the hospital," or "The coffee was cold this morning."
Trivial stuff.
It feels like criticism, but it's actually a sabotage attempt to keep the leader close and undifferentiated. It's designed to pull them down from the big vision back to the trivial.
So what's the solution? How does a leader survive the shower without getting burned or frozen?
Differentiation of self.
That sounds like a heavy therapy term. Can you define that for us in plain English?
It means defining yourself rather than trying to control others.
Yeah.
So it's the difference between saying, "You always interrupt me," which is coercive and reactive, and saying, "I am going to finish my sentence now."
Ah, so using "I believe," "I will" versus "you must," "you should."
It sounds subtle, but it shifts the power dynamics entirely. It takes you out of the emotional tangle. It says, "I am separate from your reaction." And interestingly, sometimes the best way to show the differentiation is actually playfulness.
I have to share the anecdote from the source about the siblings. This cracked me up. So there's a church meeting. The treasurer and a prominent member start screaming at each other, a really heated argument.
And the pastor, who is new, feels his pulse racing. He thinks, "I need to intervene. I have to save the meeting. The whole ship is sinking." He's reaching for the hot water tap. He's about to overfunction.
But then another member just starts laughing, just guffawing, and says, "There go the brother and sister again."
It was a routine,
Yeah.
a playful, if dysfunctional, family dynamic. They had been doing this for 40 years. If the pastor had intervened seriously, he would have made it so much worse. He would have triangulated himself right into their mess. By stepping back, or realizing the humor, he allowed the system to regulate itself.
He
He realized, this isn't my anxiety to carry.
It's about not taking the bait.
It is. And the ethical foundation for this, according to the Bohr source, is imago Dei, the image of God.
That sounds heavy, but break it down practically for us.
It just transforms how you see difficult people. If you view a difficult person, a sandpaper person, who rubs you the wrong way as just a nuisance to be managed, you will always be reactive. You'll try to sand them down. You'll try to fix them.
But
if you view them as a human being made in the image of God, however broken or annoying they might be, you can maintain your cool. You can dignify them without letting them drive the bus.
that is a profound shift from managing a nuisance to dignifying a human. It creates distance, but it's a respectful distance. It allows you to lead without being consumed.
It changes everything. It turns a power struggle into a boundary.
Okay, so we've covered the internal engine of grit, the external reality of failure, and the complex social systems we all live in. I want to pivot now to the future, because we aren't just managing these things in person anymore. We're doing it online, and we're using technology to help us.
This brings us to the concept of digital identity and the AI habit coach.
Let's start with identity. We all feel that pressure to be perfect online, the highlight reel. We see everyone else's successes and none of their failures. But the source suggests a specific strategy for authenticity, the 80-20 rule.
This is a really pragmatic approach to a digital presence. The suggestion is 80% authentic content, real struggles, real opinions, the behind the scenes, the mess in the kitchen, and 20% aspirational or highlight content.
Why that ratio? Why not just 100% real all the time?
Because if it's 100% struggle, it can be exhausting for the audience. It can become a therapy session that no one signed up for. It can seem self-indulgent. But if it's 100% highlight, it's fake and alienating.
Right.
The 80-20 mix keeps it grounded in reality but still moving forward. It shows you're human, but you're also making progress. It's failing forward in public, essentially.
And they suggest gradual exposure. You don't just dump all your trauma on Instagram on day one. Start with one unfiltered photo, then maybe a caption about a bad day. You build the muscle of vulnerability slowly.
Which brings us to a really interesting paradox. We are trying so hard to be more real online, but we are also starting to use artificial intelligence, something inherently fake, inherently programmed to coach our real-world behaviors.
The Habit Coach study. This is fascinating. They built a chatbot to help people break bad habits, but it wasn't just a generic "you can do it" bot. It wasn't just sending motivational quotes.
No, not at all. It had a dynamic switching mechanism.
That sounds fancy. What does it actually do?
It's brilliant, really. The bot switches between two modes, interactive dialogue and educational explanations.
So asking questions versus just teaching.
Exactly. If the user seems engaged and knows what they're doing, the bot asks questions. What triggers your habit? How did you feel when you skipped the gym? It acts like a therapist or a coach, drawing the answer out of you. But, and this is the absolute key, if the user says, I don't know, the bot stops asking.
Because asking, well, why don't you know, is just annoying.
It's frustrating and it's demoralizing. If I don't know why I ate the cookie, asking me 10 more times won't help. It'll just make me feel stupid.
Yeah.
So the bot detects that confusion or that lack of knowledge, and it switches to teacher mode.
And starts explaining things.
Right. It explains why habits form. It gives examples. It provides what researchers call procedural knowledge. It fills the gap.
It mimics a good human coach. A good coach knows when to push you for an answer and when to just stop and explain the technique. The fact that we can program this switching into an AI is a significant leap in behavioral tech.
It creates a conversational flow that feels much more empathetic, even though it's all just code.
It's like having a very patient, very gritty expert in your pocket.
One that never judges your consistency of interest.
True. The AI doesn't care if you quit your habit yesterday, as long as you log back in today. It has infinite patience. It doesn't have an ego to get bruised.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We certainly have. Let's do a quick recap of the journey. We started with grit, and we learned that it's not about endless passion. It's really about the perseverance of effort. You can hate the process, you can struggle with the bookshelf, and still be gritty. We learned to watch out for those negative wording traps in our own self-assessment. Changing your mind is okay.
Then we looked at failure. We learned to get off the failure freeway by distinguishing between solvable problems and facts of life that have to be accepted. And we learned that sometimes you just have to be an exhibit like Calvin Coolidge and laugh it off.
Then we tackled gossip and systems. We saw how competence can act as a shield, sometimes unfairly, for bad behavior, and how the blank stare is your best defense against the rumor mill. We learned that gossip is often just fear in disguise.
And that leaders need to stand in that hot shower without reacting, differentiating themselves while staying connected to the system. It's about maintaining your own temperature, regardless of the water around you.
And finally, we looked at AI and identity, using the 80-20 rule to be real online, and using dynamic AI coaches to keep us on track with procedural knowledge.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
For me, the big takeaway is about distinction. Success seems to be about knowing the difference between things, knowing the difference between interest and passion, between I failed and I am a failure, between a problem and a fact of life.
And between I need to fix this person and I need to define myself, it turns out that being well-informed isn't just about knowing facts. It's about having the right categories to sort your experiences into. It's about mental organization.
That's a great way to put it. It's about having the right mental filing cabinet.
And I'd like to leave you with a final thought. We talked about AI coaches and digital avatars. We're increasingly using these tools to program our habits and curate our personalities.
The scripting of our own lives.
Exactly. My question is this. As we get better at programming our avatars and using AI to direct our behavior, are we actually building character or are we just writing better code? If an AI prompts you to be kind, and you are kind because it told you to be, is that your virtue or is it the machine's?
Oof. Are we becoming the best versions of ourselves or just the best programmed simulations of ourselves? That is a haunting thought.
That is the question to mull over this week.
Well, on that existential bombshell, we want to thank you for listening. To the learner out there, keep persevering even if your interest wavers.
Yeah. And find the exit on the freeway.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.